Support for NPR comes from Cancer Treatment Centers of America, where treatment options include targeted therapies guided by genomic testing and immunotherapies that use the body's immune system to help fight the cancer. More at cancercenter.com.
Welcome to the small batch edition of Pop Culture Happy Hour. I'm Linda Holmes. I'm the editor of NPR's pop culture and entertainment blog, Monkey See, and I'm here today in the studio with Barrie Hardymon, who's an editor on NPR's Weekend Edition. Hi, Barrie.
Hi, how are you?
Well, I'm very good. Barrie and I are in the studio today because we wanted to take a moment and talk a little bit about Harper Lee, who, as you perhaps may have heard, we learned today, Friday, that she had died. She was
89.
She was
years
89
old.
years
ripe
old.
old age.
You may know her, you probably know her as the author of To Kill a Mockingbird. And more recently, they had released Go Set a Watchman, which was a sort of either sequel or early version or kind of unclear exactly.
Literary curiosity,
yeah,
I like to call it.
Yeah, unclear exactly what its relationship
but fascinating
to Mockingbird was. But we wanted to just take a minute and talk about To Kill a Mockingbird in particular and kind of its status in the culture. What's your relationship to that book like, Barrie? It seems like everyone has one.
Well, actually, one of the great, Mary Murphy, who made a collection of essays about To Kill a Mockingbird, describes it as the world's biggest book club because everybody, that it is in itself a kind of book club because everybody has a moment where they read it. I read it at camp. My mom tucked it into a backpack. And, you know, they discovered these voices. And for me, it was when I read it and I think I read it maybe when I was 13, it was probably the first time that I had read a piece of writing where the voice of the child was so clear.
Yeah.
And that wasn't, like Beverly Cleary, that was
right.
An adult, because it is an adult scout looking back, where I really felt like someone had captured the thing of being young that was both, honest, but also really, really intellectual in this way that those two things were sort of married. I think now people sort of call it YA.
Mm-hmm.
And you.
Oh, that's interesting. We would not have talked about it that way at the time.
No, because it was this novel because it's both a novel about, a young scout, but it's also this novel about race relations in the Deep South.
Right, absolutely. And I think, for me, when I look back on that book, that is, as you say, it's one of those books that, because certainly you never want to say anything has been read by everyone, right? That's always wildly
right.
overbroad.
Right.
But because you feel like it is something that so many people have read and so many people have opinions about. And look, there are a lot of complex opinions to have, I think, about
sure.
To Kill a Mockingbird.
Sure.
You still have this white this white lawyer, her father, Atticus Finch, set up as this kind of the hero of the book.
He is described as saintly in so many places.
It's there are extraordinarily complicated dynamics that go on in that book. For me, it was also a very unusual portrayal of a girl. She's 6 when the main events of the book are happening, and she's kind of looking back on it. The fact that Scout is so self-possessed and very uninterested in the idea that one day she will be a wife and mom, and that's not her. She's much more comfortable, it seems like, playing with boys.
Right.
And it's not just a tomboy quality, but it's a real sense of self that she has. And I think for me, that's one of the things that always stood out for me about that book.
Yeah, it's in the same way as, it is very much about being, I should say, a young girl, but it is also the child who is able to take in all of the information about social mores and what is in vogue and what is, and still say, nope, this is how I want my pancakes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is a thing that I think any person that has been a child, but particularly if you read it at that sort of tender age when you are becoming a person, like a grown-up person, you recognize that, these are the strands of self that I can take with me on the way to adulthood. And actually, I will say, because I know a lot has been written about Go Set a Watchman, which is not a perfect book. And like I said, it's more of a curiosity maybe than a classic. But
I think that's a good description.
I really like who Jean Louise becomes. She becomes a really interesting woman who retains that sense of rejecting these ideas of Southern womanhood in favor of her own, self.
Right. I think it's very much a book, Mockingbird, I'm saying, is a book about learning how to be a kind person. And I think that in addition to the broader questions of racial politics, which, as you say, are a huge part of that book, there are a whole bunch of pieces of that book that are about ordinary kindness, right?
Human relations.
Whether it's the scene where they're at dinner with this kid who puts syrup on dinner.
Yes.
And,
Walter.
And she is inclined to make fun of him. And her father makes it clear it's about trying to make other people comfortable, that that's what it means to be a kind and a good-mannered person. And that's the kind of scene that I think a lot of books wouldn't bother to include.
Yes.
But it's about this girl who you are really taught to love and adore, nevertheless has to really be corrected quite firmly by her father about what it means to be a kind person. The same thing happens in the book with regard to Boo Radley, who's this recluse.
Yes.
And there's a lot of talk about sort of what is the kind treatment of this man who cannot really and does not really want to function as a public is not really looking to be brought out of the house and become someone who mingles with everyone at church. And what does it mean to be kind to that person? So one of the things that for me is interesting about that book is that those smaller lessons in some ways have been more durable for me than the book's ideas about race, which
I think that's a very good point.
When you first learn them, all of those things, for example, the fact that the white woman in the book essentially has to invent a story in which she was sexually assaulted by this black man
in order to explain her relationship.
In order to explain what actually happened because of the shame that she feels. And then she herself is being abused and has her own issues. Those things are interesting and very thought-provoking, especially when you're in the early stages of thinking about those kinds of dynamics.
As I've gone back and now, my own education has and my experience of the world has become wider, I go back and I note that, those passages do feel less fully formed. Every single person of color is formed a relationship, and relationship is made into a character in relationship to the white person.
Of course.
But like you say, the less broad themes that are just relational between humans, the relationship between Scout and her brother, between Scout and Walter, the relationships between Calpurnia and Scout. These are the things, and I really literally can't think about Boo Radley without getting a lump in my throat, because it was the first time I encountered a grown-up version of the kinds of slings and arrows that happen to you as a young adult.
Yeah.
The person who made fun of you because you weren't wearing the right thing. You do have that moment when you're a kid of, oh, we're all Boo Radley.
Well, right. And I think but the kids in this book are really given the opportunity to be fully built out as people, right? Not just Scout, but her brother Jem as well, and their friend Dill. I think based on Truman Capote, no?
Yes. Because they played
Harper
together
Lee
as children.
knew and played with, is this kind of, funny, chatty kid who says unusual, oddball things and also needs a place to fit in. So the fact that the kids were fully grown, sort of fully not grown in
realized
age, but fully realized, was a very unusual thing, and that book just continues to be something that's so well known by people that it becomes something that you can instantly latch onto. Like just recently there was a news report that Aaron Sorkin was going to adapt Kill a Mockingbird for a stage version. And instantly you got a lot of sort of, whether you liked him or didn't like him, if you knew his style, all of a sudden there are a lot of kind of jokes flying around about what that would be like.
Having reread it recently in order to sort of contrast and compare it to Watchmen, the prose is breathtaking. It is so beautifully written.
Yeah, and they made a lovely movie too.
Oh, they made
Gregory Peck.
They did.
Awfully good movie. Well, I'm glad that you could come and talk to me about this today, Barrie. And full episodes of Pop Culture Happy Hour are available every Friday on iTunes or wherever you get podcasts or at npr.org. Thanks, Barrie.
Thank you.